Hi, I'm back, and I finally beat Xenoblade 3. It's been it's been a minute. uh, Sorry about the prolonged absence. As I had mentioned in pretty much the last video that I had made months ago, I needed a mental health break from social media, from YouTube. I needed time to focus on myself and figure out what I really wanted to do, not just with this channel, but with my life in general. So I'm back here now today, and I've beaten Xenoblade 3, and I want to give you guys my impressions on the game. So this is going to be completely separate and different from, a traditional review style that you see me do on the channel. Typically, when I make a review on a game, it's a scripted, long process that, has a lot of high detailed editing and is very, very concise, and I make my arguments exactly how I want them to be conveyed to people. This is 100% just impressions. Their first takes. I actually just beat Xenoblade 3, like, last night. Surprisingly. So this is going to be just my fresh take on the game. It's going to be separate from the reviews. I still plan on making a fully fledged Xenoblade 3 review. It's going to take a little more time. I guess we'll get right into it, but before I do, I won't spend too much time on this because I'd rather just get to talking about the game before anything. I do want to explain my absence and what I'm going to be doing going forward, right? So it wasn't just the YouTube space that made me kind of fall out of doing more YouTube content. I also, for a few months there, fell out of it with video games. It was very difficult for me to, in all honesty, find myself to play a lot of games lately, and it makes me, it's a little unfortunate to say, I kind of for a little bit just fell out of love with video games, because video games have been a thing in my life for a really long time. Like, it's something that I have an extreme attachment to. I have extreme attachments to video games, and it's, this type of media is a passion for me. But there was just something about these last few months that I couldn't do it. It was either games really weren't meeting my expectations, or maybe I was a little burnt out because of internet discourse, or just a number of different factors that made me just kind of step away from everything in general, and made me question, what is it I really like and what is it I really love. Getting back into this now, I'm confident in saying that I think I'm fine continuing doing video game stuff and talking about video games. It's kind of hard when you play games for years and you like talking about them for years, that you just kind of shelve that and never go back to it, right? So that's an important thing to mention. As well as that, the new Pokemon game is coming out in a week from when I'm recording this, probably sooner when I upload this, I don't know yet. I'm super excited for that game, and I'm definitely going to be covering it on this channel. I don't know how well Pokemon's going to go over with my audience, so let's get into my impressions on Xenoblade 3. So, if you've caught the live streams in the past of me playing through the game, you'd know that I was going into this with high expectations. I was really micro-analyzing the cutscenes, and I had a lot of positive things to say about the game, with some minor criticisms here and there laid about, but that was only up until about Chapter 5. It was literally at the end of Chapter 5 that I dropped the game, and I stopped playing for a bit. So what would I say after beating the game, doing all 7 chapters, running around doing every single hero quest, discovering multiple different areas in the game, stuff like that, fighting bosses? What would I say is my overall impression of Xenoblade 3? I would say in terms of the story, the first 60% of Xenoblade 3 is perfect. It is the game that I wanted. It is a fantastic experience, and it has so many nuanced storytelling details. The characters are so well written, with so much, compassion emanating from each of them, and their struggles and their plights are all really palpable, and I love that experience. I love going through that, and having all of these 6 characters all come together, and each have their own personal struggles and express them in different ways, and have each of them bounce off one another in cutscenes and in dialogue, and getting their own unique takes on things, right? Like, I like that the characters all contribute something not only to the story, but to their dialogue and how they interact with each other about certain events. You know, Tyon's always the inquisitive one. He always comes up with plans. He always, he always overanalyzes and overthinks things. Noah is the one who's filled with compassion, who, kind of tries to be the level head of the crew, and tries to, keep everyone's goals set straight. You have Lance, who is the hot-headed, kind of jumps into everything right away. You have Uni, who bounces off of him, is really snarky and kind of almost comic relief in a way, right? You have Senna, who she's the bubbly, cheerful personality who tries to lighten the mood when things are dour. And you have Mio, who, bounces off of everyone, but is mainly the way to kind of keep our characters emotionally connected. She's the one who kind of keeps the conversations going and tries to get people to, I don't want to say open up about things, but not only, but to, discuss things when it comes to characters' feelings on events, stuff like that. And I think those characters all work fantastically in this space, and they're all utilized excellently, which is such a step up from previous Xenoblade games. All these characters feel essential. They really give you time to marinate with them, to understand who they are as individuals, and they each get their own unique stories, their own unique backstories and character arcs and developments that are prevalent throughout the entire game, and that you see massive roles in when it comes to the final moments of the game even too. And I appreciated that a lot. I thought that was a really great approach to storytelling with these characters, is giving them all time to shine and giving us a sense of who they are as individuals. It's a great crux of the game's narrative, right? And that first 60% is really good purely because, I wouldn't say the story beats are necessarily the most exciting or the most, punchy. I wasn't really drawn to the story in the way that I was drawn to the first game story, right? Or even like the second game story in a weird way, where it was the events that transpired that made me kind of want to keep playing. It was more like seeing how these characters could interact next, and kind of, I guess, exploring them and their role in this world, and understanding more about the world overall, that made me appreciate the game story and made me want to go forward. It's like there were a lot of really great themes that the game explored throughout that first 60%, that usually those themes are, delegated to the very tail end of the game. A lot of philosophical ideas that, were thrown in, like just things in general about, their existence in the world. There was a moment in the game where the characters talked about, contemplating suicide, and, instead of, facing the kind of evil and the pressures of the world laden before them. This idea of, a group of 6 people kind of being outcasted as almost terrorists, and labeled as these evil figures amongst people who they once considered their friends and family, kind of almost brainwashed through propaganda into thinking them as the evil, as the villain, right? And these 6 people being fugitives as a result of that, as all of them being the Ouroboros. Very, compelling and unique stuff that the game really, touched on. And I think it touched on very tastefully, and it was very well done. So yeah, the first 60% of the game, I would say, they hit it out of the park. It was some of the best writing and the best character development I've seen in any Monolith Soft game, bar none, that I've played. And I thought the game had a really great potential, depending on the direction it wanted to go in, to really create the best game that Monolith Soft has ever done, period, in terms of its story. Spoiler alert, I don't think it's that. I think they fumbled the bag near the end, but before I get into that, I do want to discuss some story beats that I thought were a little trite at the beginning. So, like, right, I did think the stuff with Yorin was a little like, you can't really do that. I think it would have been more interesting if it was like, if it was less obvious that it was Yorin, right? Who was Mobius J. Like you really could have had him just be in his Mobius form the whole time, as like the big hulking dude, instead of him being the little fat guy, because you can easily tell it's him when he's the only character with that body type in the video game. You know, like, it makes it really easy. It makes it a really easy tell, right? Like, same with, and then when they do that once, you can kind of see it coming again and again and again when they continue to do it with other Mobius. So that was like one thing that to me it was like, oh, you really didn't. That kind of ruined some of the storytelling for me with Yorin. It made me disconnect from the character and the events that were happening there. Even though I did like, the idea of this one character kind of, sacrificing himself and then being reborn as this kind of evil creature, because he felt like he made the wrong choice in saving his friends. He felt like he made the wrong choice because he was considered the weak one and he didn't want to be weak, and he couldn't really make amends with that fact with himself at his deathbed, and instead, comes back, given a second chance, and kind of turns sour as a result of it. It's stuff like that yeah. I mean, like, I wish the game, the setup was there, but the execution I think was weak. I think is the best way to put it. I also think that the hero missions were fantastic. They were better than the story by far, because the Mobius stuff, in all honesty, is so weak in the game. They're like Team Rocket level villains 100%. The characters, the Mobius, they're just not, like, they're not compelling to me because they don't do anything other than just be evil for the sake of being evil. And I think that's kind of a problem that plagues pretty much all of these games' villains minus one. And that really sucks, because I think they had a lot of potential to make these, evil, threatening forces more impactful to our characters. They do crazy evil things, and they're like, they're like Bowser style villains for sure. But giving each of them more reason to exist would have been definitely more appreciated, because really the bottom line for each Mobius is like, they just don't want to die. And they're brought back just because. So, like, it's not really compelling to me, in all honesty. I think the Mobius were really underutilized as individual characters, but that's just me. I digress. So now getting into the final stretch of the game, why I think they fumbled the bag. So here's the thing, guys. Once chapter 5 hit, that's when I was like, this game can make it or break it. I kind of expressed my mild disdain at the execution of the events in Chapter 5 when, Mio's execution trial was coming up and she was going to be, sent off, and everyone was, so depressed about it, and it was such a big moment for Noah. And then it had the big revelation of M and N too, and the plot twist that came with that. But that moment really just only served to confuse me, and only served to be like, well, I don't really know what direction this game is going in anymore. Because they had a very clear setup, right? Like, here's how I feel about it, right? So, like, typically in a JRPG, the characters and the story are all follow this one consistent narrative with a straight goal to one villain and to, doing one thing that makes complete sense up until maybe the last, like, end chapter, where they defeat that villain, they execute that goal, and then, like, I don't know, God shows up and then they, like, go and fight God instead of and that's their finally, like, their actual final challenge or something like that. With this game, you know, the goal from the beginning was Sword March. Go to Sword March. Go to Sword March. And find the real villain there. So the goal rapidly shifts the second that N captures them. And then the game just kind of diverts and your goals shift last second from Sword March to save the queen to, well, we have to go fight Zed. Like, it just seemed really it seemed really like they rushed the last portion of the game, right? Like, it feels like unfocused, I guess is the best way to put it. Especially when there are some things that, like, made me question everything initially. I don't know if you guys know this, right? But, like, they changed a critical in-game item in one of the last cutscenes of the game in Chapter 6 or 7. I think it was the end chapter of Chapter 6. The end cutscene of Chapter 6. That they changed N's sword in one of those cutscenes, in, like, pretty much right before the final battle you have with him. And it used to just be Noah's blade with the Lucky 7, but they, like, adjusted it to not be that. And that was, like, a huge thing to me. It's like, you completely changed the weapon, because that was supposed to be, like, the origin weapon, right? Like, so then why was it different in the first cutscene? Is it because the developers had an oversight of it and they realized they fucked up, or is it just because they wanted to change the narrative after the fact? I think it's because they fucked up and they realized they put the wrong weapon model in there, which, you know, that also had me questioning things before I went back and I saw that they changed it. So it's like stuff like that. It's like, definitely feels like the game was rushed. And that on top of, you know, like, so many questions I had about the game's world. And that were, you know, really easy to, you know, the answers were easy to follow up until N's involvement in the story. Like, you know, it was really obvious our characters, they had 10 years to live, right? That was a big thing. And their lives were fleeting, and it was a tragic thing for them because, you know, they would see their friends die right before their eyes, and there are moments compared to the humans that were introduced prior to that, you know, people like Monica and Gondor, who got to live a lot longer. They kind of seem pale in comparison. I love that storytelling moment where they all go up to the baby and they're like, oh, this is what a child is? Because it makes complete sense, right, in their context. They don't know what a kid is because they're born out of, like, test tubes and they only live 10 years and they don't know, like, the beauty of life and death in that capacity. They only know, you know, to die to survive. And they're born into a world where they're trained as essentially child soldiers, like Metal Gear Solid style, right? But when N is introduced, it's like, I don't know, like, what other elements they're adding into the story. Because, like, at first I was like, okay, so how does N exist, right? Because N is Noah. That's 100% confirmed. N is just Noah. So is N another version of Noah from a different universe? Because, you know, like, the way that it's framed is that version of N had a kid. His version of Mio died. They kind of effed the human colony, outed them out and ran off. And they tried to, you know, run away from their problems and run away from life. And eventually took the coward's way out, or what's considered the coward's way out in that game, and wanted to live in the endless now. He wanted to live in a continuous present with the person that he loved, instead of embracing whatever death and whatever the unknown was beyond. He wanted to continue his life at the cost of the people around him, at the cost of everything that he knew was right. And that's a unique and compelling story in and of itself. And I like that. I thought that was, you know, it's great. But, like, everything surrounding that about the setup just made no sense to me. Like, who is N? How does N exist? Why can N go inside of Noah at the end of the game? Like, right? Like, stuff like that just confused me. I don't understand, like, how that character exists. Is he a different version of Noah from another dimension? Is he, like, the same Noah from that dimension, but the test tube? How did he live long enough with Mio, who was going to die within, like, you know, like 2 months from the events of the actual, like, Cass? How did he live long enough with her to have a kid with her? right? Was this version of Noah a human and not, like a human, and not like what the what the characters are who live 10 years. Like what's the setup behind all of that? I don't understand like how N came into existence in the beginning, and they really fumbled because they didn't explain that. They didn't ever get into any detail about Noah or N's origin. Because like if there's a version of N and M who exist, right? Like, shouldn't there be other versions of Uni and Lands and Tyon and Senna that could also live beyond that point? And that's also another thing I want to bring up that was like never actually touched upon in the story, right? Like Uni goes up to her essentially her dead corpse on a battlefield and gets a flashback of a Mobius killing her in a past life. And like that's super cool. I'm like, oh my god, they're going to touch upon that later. That's going to be like a really big revelation for our cast. They're going to kind of see their past selves in different struggles, fighting and dying and being reborn, and fighting and dying and being reborn, and fighting and dying and being reborn, stuff like that. So I assumed, oh man, they must be in this cycle, and we're going to see that utilized in a literal, tangible sense, and they never do that again. Now, at first I would have argued, oh, maybe that's N's role and M's role, right, is like they're part of that cycle. But then everything I've learned about the cycle up until that point doesn't make sense for N and M to exist, right? Because N and M, they have to be sent and then brought back in order to be reborn again as like, the test tube babies that they were. So if N and M decided to be Mobius, like Yorin did, for example, right? Like Yorin or like Chris, shouldn't they have not been reborn? And Noah and Mio are reborn later, even though N and M still exist as Mobius, right? Like they shouldn't only one version of them exist, which is why I was confused as to like, oh, maybe they're multiverse, like maybe they're from a different dimension. What happened to the kid? Where did the kid go? Like stuff like that, like questions I have that the game just lingers with and then never touches upon, and it feels like they rushed the story out so much, they added all these elements near the end that it didn't feel focused. It didn't feel like where, like, again, questions like, where did that kid go? Why are there two Noahs and Mios? Why can both of them exist at the same time? So yeah, that's where I feel like the game fumbled near the end, is the execution of a lot of things. I feel like there was a lot of confusing elements to the story that had me scratching my head and questioning like the reality of things, like, and like everything in the game's narrative just kind of seemed to start crumbling. Because again, the big thing about storytelling for me in games like these is like, how well can you keep the rules and the lore consistent? And I think they definitely did not keep it super consistent at the final stretch of the game. There was definitely a really good amount of time where like I was just like, I don't know what's happening anymore. Like I don't know what these characters are going on about anymore. And then so the next reason why I think the ending game portion fumbles is that Chapter 6 literally just puts the story on halt, and you go on this globe-trotting fetch quest that is so boring, man. It's so dull. I'll be real with you, like it's not that it's like super time-consuming or grindy or anything, and it's not like it's necessarily the worst fetch quest I've done in a JRPG, but I just think it was so poorly placed, because you ramp up at the end of Chapter 5, like some really gigantic story events happen where a character essentially kills herself and goes like full school shooter mode on everyone, and that's like freaky. Immediately after that, they just drop it and they're like, okay, well now just go around and look for parts to this ship to get into Origin. It's like, well, like, okay, we're gonna put the story on a halt for a few hours. That's not really. I guess they wanted to give you time to, go explore the world again in the last portion of the game, which cool, I guess, but like, really didn't need to put the story on a complete halt and give us nothing to do in terms of story for like a good grip for a whole chapter. It just seemed like really poorly paced to me, in all honesty. They could have put something else in there to make it more engaging, especially since at that point, like, most people, including me, because you had the ability to, just did all the hero missions before chapter 6. So it's like, then what's the point of going, because they're all, they don't scale with your level. All the hero missions are based on a certain level. And at that point, you don't want to go back and do the hero missions after, when you're already over leveled for them, right? So to me, it was just like, I didn't feel like it made sense to do that when there's no hero missions really to do, when there's no like seriously engaging part of the plot happening anymore, and all you're doing is walking around looking for like some metal for a ship. Like it just seemed like they really just wanted to pad things out at the very tail end there. So yeah, that's another thing that I feel like fumbled at the end portion. And the final thing that I think was the most underwhelming portion of Xenoblade 3 by far was its villain, was Zed. He was, my god, man, like I don't so okay. At first, when the story kind of hit at the end, and you learned that Zed was like, he wanted to live in the endless now and preserve the world as it was, I thought that was a unique take. Because at first I'm like, oh my god, wow, that's a little different from how these JRPG stories tend to end, right? It's like normally the final big bad guy wants to destroy the universe, destroy the world. He hates the world, so he wants it to end, and he wants to rebuild a new one in his own image, right? But in this case, the main villain already is in control. He wants to preserve the world as it is because he's afraid of what lies beyond, what lies in the oblivion. And our heroes are the ones who want to rebuild the world in a new image, with the freedom to choose, with the freedom to discover what's in the unknown and what lies beyond, to give people the ability to make that choice for themselves of what they want to do with themselves and their future, instead of, keeping this cycle of perpetuity going. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. It's like it flips it on its head a little bit. But then Zed just revealed himself as the most transparently dumb villain I've ever seen in my life. Where when faced with the question of why he does what he does, he just said, I did it for the lulz. I did it because it amuses me.
Of course. As for the why, it's because it amuses me.
And then I shit you not, I'm going to play it right now because I thought it was so funny. Where he's like, I hate this world. I hate it. Like he's throwing a tantrum. And I thought that was so fucking stupid.
When you cannot choose, what then? In that desperate moment, who will be there to soothe you? The self is all that exists. As such, the only cure for despair is total oblivion. That is the face of the world. I hate it. This rotten world. I loathe it.
Not only does he sound like a child, but it's literally the most like JRPG villain thing ever for someone to be like, I hate this stupid world. It's dumb. They really made Zed a bitch. I like that's how I'm gonna put it. Like that villain is so like, there's no build up, there's no backstory. He's just in the background the whole time, controlling the strings of our characters like a puppet master, and then at the very end it goes full Shakespearean. It goes full life is a stage and I'm the main actor. Fucking cringe ass shit. And then our characters just wax philosophical for 40 minutes on a stage, quite literally. And to me it just felt like they could have done so much better. The characters were built with such personality and detail and backstory, and they really felt meaningful. But the villains and the opposing force were not given that same care and attention. They were not. they were just kind of thrown in as, I'm evil because I'm evil. Because I want to be evil. Why am I here? Why am I evil? Just cause you have to fight someone who's evil. That's it. I don't have any other reason for being here. Don't have any backstory. I'm not connected to anyone in the cast. I'm not, a big major player in the events of the world. I don't have any, other characters linked to me that make me meaningful. Like compare it to, I don't know, compare. Okay, I'm gonna say that. Compare Zed to Jin or Malos from Xenoblade 2. Jin and Malos actually had some stake in the plot, were related to our characters, and had some sort of meaningful backstory that had them included and relevant in the game from the beginning. Jin, especially after Torna, he has a tragic backstory. His existence and reason for being evil, it is justified. It makes sense. The character makes sense. He does what he does because he's essentially been faced with the biggest tragedy of his lifetime, watching his best friends all die before him and feeling powerless in the face of it, right? Malos, corrupted by an evil driver, by an evil force who's kind of almost making him this pure embodiment of hatred and evil for humankind, because he's only feeding off of that negative energy from a guy who's essentially a megalomaniac and an asshole and a narcissist, right? Like, that is compelling. It makes sense. I get it. I get it, right? And it's better than Zed, who comes out and is just like, I just did it because I thought it was funny. Like, that's so fucking... That's so, like... I expected better from the villains in this game. I really did expect better from these characters, and it's unfortunate that that's how the game kind of ended, because I really did have a lot of high hopes for how that story would end up. And again, there's so many untouched themes and unfinished story beats that I felt like were. They could have really done more with some things, is all I'll say. They could have really done more to flesh out some of these Mobius, to flesh out some of this world and these characters. The final thing I want to say is that, like, honestly, I feel like the ending, although I like it because it's, that, closure, the bubbly, happy, everyone's, coming to grips with the fact that they're going to be separated sort of thing. I was a little disappointed because, in all honesty, I thought that scene of Noah throwing his sword off of, like, Sword March, I am assuming is where they are, like that small island, and just leaving it in the past forever, was perfect. I was like, they could have ended the game there, and it would have been the perfect ending. But then they kept it going. But that was me, right? That's just my preference. I would have preferred that to be the ending than, the huge monologue our characters had about, each other and their experiences together, and getting that like weird little bit of, cute closure between all of them. So yeah, I guess other minor things I'll mention is, there are some small things that did bug me about certain characters and some execution on things. I'm gonna be real with you guys. I didn't like Senna. It's not that I thought she was a poorly written character or anything. I just didn't like her. It's only because, like, you have all these characters who struggle with their mortality and are face to face with these literal demons, impending death. In the case of Mio, she's literally about to die, and she has to come to grips with that after she's already found her one true love. And, Noah, who has to come to terms with the fact that he's going to lose her, also has to come to terms with the fact that his entire life has been a lie, and he wants to kind of live in this world of peace now versus war and strife that it's all he's known in the past. And then there's Senna, who's like, well, I have an inferiority complex because I imitate other people, and kids used to make fun of me. It's like, that just seems like juvenile compared to what everyone else is going through, right? It's like in that, like, final cutscene when everyone was, facing their demons, and you got to do their Ouroboros for them in the final battle, not the cutscene, sorry, in the final battle with Zed. And Senna just goes, I'm going to be who I want to be. I'm not going to copy anyone anymore. It's like, to me, it's just like, oh, come on. You know, like you had all these other characters with, I'm not saying that people can't, you know, it's relatable for sure. You know, people have had those struggles interpersonally with themselves about their own identity. You know, they feel like they're copying the people around them. They feel like they're inferior because they're a follower, right? They're not a leader, and they don't blaze their own trail of individuality, and they don't create their own identity based on their own interests. They kind of mold themselves based on the influences of the people around them, and that's what Senna wanted to do, and that's what Senna did with her life before. And then she decided, you know, that's not who I want to be. But like that's like, there are much bigger fish to fry in this world, lady. that's all I'm gonna say. Which to me, it just felt a little, you know, a little silly. But that's just a nitpick. You know, your mileage may vary. You might not find it as big of a deal as I did, but I just felt like it was more like a Persona level character issue than it was a Xenoblade level character issue, where she's watching her friends die and she's thinking, oh man, I hate that. I hate that I pretended to be like that person before. It's like, oh yeah. You know, again, I like the game overall. I thought it was a good and fun game, and the story was great, but definitely the payoff was not there. It was not there as much as I thought it would be. So getting to the final portion of this, I want to talk just about the gameplay experience I had, right? So unfortunately, when push comes to shove, I'm going to say that this video game, the gameplay, 100% kind of falls into the the pitfall that Xenoblade 2 did at the end of its game. The fact that the game, at some point when you figure out what works for you, is just trivial. It doesn't matter how many options you're given, how much you're able to explore. You know, like, I don't think this is the best combat system in any JRPG. I don't know if it's the best in the Xenoblade game. It might be. I don't know. It's debatable. Here's the thing. At some point with this game, they gave me too much to play with. They gave me way too much. Not only could you level up your classes past level 20 when you mastered them and did side quests for your characters, but you got so many different classes you could roll with each individual character, each of your 6 characters. You could have different heroes in the party that all affected your chain attacks differently. You could mix and match each of these individual arts by unlocking them and then equipping them to your extra arts palette and mixing them with, you know, like other classes that you could use later on. There's even a class that lets you literally pick any art from any class and mix it into that class, and it was called the Soul Hacker class. And all of that was so overwhelming that it just made me not want to explore the combat any further. Because I mean, that's just, again, it comes to me with the whole respecting your time thing. The game just at that point was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to spend literally hundreds of hours exploring this game's combat for a number of reasons. One, the more I explored the combat, the higher I leveled up. The easier and more trivial the game became, no matter what difficulty I was playing. I was playing on hard mode. You guys saw it. You guys know. That's another issue too. Hard mode, I would not recommend it for a single person. Like, do not play this game on hard mode, because it is literally just damage sponging enemies. It's not, you know, like the enemies have new moves that they do. It's not like they're more aggressive. It's just that they do more damage. You do less damage. Figure it out. And that's not really a good combat system to have, especially when at that point, all you want to worry about is min-maxing your damage. And then beyond that, you know, having all that ability to all experiment leads you to overlevel your characters, right? And I think that made it difficult in a first playthrough when they locked off the expert mode feature to you, right? So like, everyone told me don't use the rest spots near the end of my streams. Don't use the rest spots. Just fight in battles, and then you won't have to worry about it being overleveled. that's kind of true, but then I would go and I would, experiment with different classes, level up my characters' classes, and unlock as many as I could, get them past certain levels. Then I'd do the quest for, to get the mastery classes and level them up to level 30. And you know what would happen then? I would get so overleveled, it wouldn't even be funny, because it doesn't even matter if I hit rest spots, because that's not the main contributing factor to your level ups. It's one, grinding against enemies, and what you want to do to experiment with what works and what doesn't. You want to fight an enemy that's equal level to you, so you can be like, okay, well, this works better than this. And then on top of that, there's a system that I think the future Xenoblade games need to drop, or at least need to, if they're going to keep it in the game, let us keep expert mode, please. It is or let us turn it off even. It is the bonus experience system from Chain Attacks. That system honestly made the game so trivial, because Chain Attacks by the end game were the main source of damage I had. So like my team layout was essentially just survive long enough to initiate Chain Attack, and then when you initiate Chain Attack, pray that you get a really good Chain Attack like order of characters. Usually the hero going first is the best, and then just DPS the hell out of the enemy with Chain Attack. That was huge, because by my final run through of the game, I ran with a crit build. Like my main DPS did tons of critical hit damage, to an insane degree, where I had Noah literally soloing Chain Attacks. He chained off of himself. He did like 500,000 damage per attack. It was ridiculous. I think the highest I had ever gone with a Chain Attack order was like 3 or 4 million damage. And that was pretty intense to me. I was like, wow, this I kind of broke the game, because the only issue was damage sponging at that point. It's like, how long can I survive in order to initiate Chain Attack? And then when I do Chain Attack, take off like a third or a fourth of the enemy's health, and then rinse and repeat. And that was the entire combat system. Didn't matter what classes I used, didn't matter what layouts I had. It was all about, okay, which classes heal the best? Oh, the flag twirler, maybe the gun, the medic gun, or the medic gunner. What classes tank the best? Honestly, Lanz's class was really good. Monica's class was really good. What class did DPS the best? Gondor's class, because it was critical hit focused, did fucking amazing. Alexandria's class, because it was critical hit focused, did fucking amazing. So like, those were good examples of, those are really good DPS classes to use. And it became less about positioning arts or using arts in certain scenarios against certain characters and fights, and literally just became, okay, what does the most damage? What does the most healing? What tanks the best? And that was kind of a universal rule across every single enemy. And then when that happened, it was like, okay, can I maintain with this build long enough to Chain Attack, and how much damage do I do on Chain Attack? Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter what enemy I was fighting. It all kind of ended up the same. And that's kind of the problem with the game's combat overall. Doesn't matter my character build, doesn't matter what I experimented with. And I think that's going to make the replayability of it a little harsh. Is like, yeah, I already found the best method that works for me. I mean, your mileage may vary. Everyone's going to have, different experiences through the game based on what they discover and what they don't. But once you discover that thing that worked for you, and whatever works the best, overall, I think kind of would make it so that, okay, well, I'm not going to really need to experiment with anything else, because this is, unless you're going to do like some challenge run for yourself in the future, right? So yeah, I mean, that was probably my big complaint with the combat, is that it ultimately turned into, okay, tank long enough to get into Chain Attack, do Chain Attack when, and then by the end stretch of the game, because of the bonus experience system, I didn't need to grind at all. I could just run past any enemies undetected or even detected, and I feel like I wasn't in any, I wasn't really in any danger of losing any fights. And eventually, at the very tail end, because the fights were taking so long with damage sponging, that I just decided to lower the difficulty at the very, very tail end, because I was like, I just don't have time to... I knew I could do it. It wasn't a problem that I could or couldn't do it. It was more just like the fights were taking 30 to 40 minutes to do. Like a single phase of fight was taking 30 or 40 minutes to do. And at that point I was like, okay, I don't need this right now. So I lower the difficulty for that reason. But yeah, I mean, Xenoblade 3, right? It was my most anticipated game of this year. Do I think it reached the expectations that I wanted it to? No. I don't think it did. But I think it was a good game. I do think it was a good video game. It's definitely a good game. A fun game, one that I will look fondly back on because of the pros far outweighing the cons. If I had to rank this on the Xenoblade echelon for me, I would say Xenoblade 1 is really still far up there. And then this is somewhere close to Torna level of good for me. Like, I like Torna a lot, but I didn't think Torna was like remarkable and amazing. And I like this a lot, and I don't think it's remarkable or amazing. So it's in that like level. Like, it's right below Xenoblade. It's right below Torna, maybe. Or right above Torna, I would say, for me. One of the two. It's in that echelon. Xenoblade 1 is way up there. Then this and Torna are kind of like B tier. And then it follows each of the games other than that prior, and a little bit more below. So yeah, I mean, I will say this isn't the follow-up that I was hoping for personally. I don't think it is impactful to me as other JRPGs were, because I've given you guys my my tier list on JRPGs in the past, right? Like, this is one of those games that I will look fondly on, but it definitely was not shaping any ideas I have on JRPGs. It's not a trailblazing game for me. It's just kind of another JRPG, which is unfortunate because the original Xenoblade was that game for me. It was the game that made me be like, man, video games are amazing. And this game I don't think reaches that same level as Xenoblade 1 for me. Take with that what you will. Of course, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I do want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. If you stuck around for this long, this nearly hour-long video, wow, I appreciate you. Thank you. Keep an eye out for a fully scripted review. I don't think it's gonna... Would it be this long? Maybe it would be this long. I don't know. It will probably be here in December. Yeah, and I'll see you guys next week for Pokemon, I guess. Thanks for watching. Peace out.